This week on Dream Farm, I want to talk about how many acres of your property you need to devote to food plots. And this is a super hard question to answer because every property is different. And I do a fair amount of consulting, and that's one of the big questions that we always have as we get into these trips is, how much food do I need? Do I have enough? Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute Food Plot Blends, the Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail app, and Hoyt Archery. The simple answer to that is you have enough if there's some left over in the spring. And you don't want a ton left over because obviously, it costs money to plant food plots, but you don't want the deer to run out in January. The ideal situation is to really create an environment that's best for the deer, not necessarily one that puts them into stress where they're easier to kill. You might say, I only want as much food as what the deer need to take them through the hunting season, and then I don't care after that. Well, that's kind of short-sighted because what you really want to do is to create the very best environment for the deer. And I've said it a number of times, and I'm sure I'll say it over and over, but the hardest part about killing an old buck, a mature buck, is for that deer to be on the property in the first place. So you've got to create an environment that's attractive to those deer and holds those deer. So you don't want to be running out of food. So that's kind of the first qualifier to keep in mind is, enough food means that there needs to be some left over in the spring. So normally that results in having to plant a lot more than people think. Like on my farm, I think we ran out sometime in January. So I didn't have enough food. I kind of knew that going in. It was my first year there, but I didn't know for sure. But now I know I need a lot more food plot acres. So you can start and say, okay, I'm going to do 5%. If I have traditional whitetail habitat, let's say it's 50-50 open and timbered. So it's a blend of tillable, whether it's pasture ground or whatever it is, open ground and timber ground. I would think 5% of your total acres should be food plots. So you've got a 200-acre property, you need 10 acres of food plots. It's kind of a starting point. And I think that's a pretty good place to begin. More than likely, unless you've got a super high deer density, that's going to be enough to get you through. And if not, then obviously you've learned. If it didn't get you through, then you need more than that. But as a starting point, the 5% is a good number to stick with. But let's say you're in an environment where maybe you're out in Nebraska and you own 1,000 acres of land, most of it's pasture, and you've got a creek running through it, and there's maybe 30 acres of total cover on that whole 1,000 acres of property. Then a couple of acres, maybe 3-4 acres of food plots is going to be enough because you just don't have that many deer that you're pulling in there because the property isn't holding that many deer. So you got to balance it not only between how much land you have, but also how many deer are actually on it. The other thing to look for too is how much other food is around you. So if you're in ag country, you generally aren't going to pull deer from as far away as you would if you're in maybe just like big woods or areas that have, the deer have less access to high quality food sources. They're going to travel further in those areas with low quality food in order to get the high quality food. So you might say, central Minnesota, for example, you've got a couple 100-acre property there, and there's a bunch of timber around you, and there's not much food, not much ag. You're probably going to pull deer from quite a long distance. So your 5% rule isn't going to hold up. You probably need to be closer to 10%. And as time goes by, you may even find yourself up to 15%, just because of how far you're pulling deer from. And it's really hard to get away from that because you don't really want to say, I'm going to knock the population down. I don't want all these deer coming here, so I'm going to be more aggressively shooting does, because you're not shooting the resident deer then, you're shooting the deer that are coming from a long ways away. So you're impacting way more than just your property if you really get aggressive and say, I'm going to shoot enough does here that I don't have this influx. Well, that's going to be counterproductive too. So you just have to plan on either feeding deer less well or planting more food plots. That's I'm trying to think even in my own situation, I've got enough acres, I think, that I can put into food plot production, but in some areas you're going to be limited. Either the terrain or even the type of property that you own. If it's a big woods environment where all you've got is, timber, it's going to be really hard to put in the number of food plot acres that you need. In that situation, your best bet is probably going to be just to plant, hollow out a few openings like we've talked about in the last couple of episodes, and plant small plots, and maybe you have to put electric fence around those in order to keep the deer from wiping those out during the summer. And you do have something to hunt over, and just accept the fact that you're not going to make this property nearly as attractive as you would if you could put more food there and pull the deer in and feed them really well from around the whole neighborhood. That would be the big compromise if you just don't have the open acres. I mean, personally, my perfect property, my perfect farm is 75% cover and 25% open. And then I won't necessarily plant all 25% of that open ground, but there's an area there where you can, maybe change the habitat some. Maybe you've got a little bit of, native prairie, or you've got, some transitional, cover where the deer are coming off the big timber, big woods, and then they transition through what I call a soft edge out to the food sources. Or maybe part of it is actually commercial, where you're cash renting those acres to a farmer and not planting the whole thing to food plots. But I do like that formula, 25% open, 75% cover as the perfect whitetail farm. So if you're 100% cover, you're really going to be limited on what you can do. And we've talked about, like I said, how to convert some of that into open ground, but you're going to have to fence those plots. Even if it's clover or brassicas, they're still going to wipe you out, and you're not going to have anything there if you're pulling deer from a big area and you've got the only really good food source in that area. It's just the unfortunate reality of that type of property. And that's also going to limit the impact that you can make by improving the nutrition in that area. You're not going to be able to say, I'm going to raise the nutrition level for these deer, which is going to make them healthier. In theory, the bucks will grow bigger antlers. The does will, be healthier. Their fawns will be healthier, right away. It just creates a better, thriving whitetail herd. You won't be able to have that impact if you aren't able to, open up the ground and plant plenty of food. So, I guess that's the answer to the question. How many acres do I need? I think you start with 5%. If you have, traditional whitetail habitat, and then you be prepared to build up from there. If they wipe you out, then you need to add. And you probably need to add every year for a while until you finally hit that point where, you've drawn in everything you're going to draw in. All the deer in the area know about it. You're not increasing every year the number of deer coming in, but don't be surprised if you end up planting well over 10% of that property to food within a few years. Well, I appreciate you joining me. We'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Dream Farm. And remember to always dream big.